Welcome back. We are WNST AM 1570, Towson, Baltimore. I should say welcome home because I'm going to be doing a homecoming here in a minute. It's Baltimore Positive. We're doing a cup of soup or bowl all week long in lieu of our Super Bowl radio row coverage. I'm actually getting together with all the same people that I always had a radio row, including some Super Bowl MVPs and players and coaches that I've tracked down this week. But for Super Bowl week, we're going to be out beginning at Costas on Monday. We'll be at Fadley's in Lexington Market on Tuesday. Coco's on Wednesday. Thursday, we move to State Fair in Catonsville, which is this guy's side of town. And then on Friday, we'll wrap things up at Cooper's North in Timonium with my pal Terry, cancer survivor. So we're telling some stories, all of it brought to you by the Maryland Lottery in conjunction with our friends at Wise Markets and some wise conversations. It is always a wise conversation when I get together with this guy. He has been stationed in Jacksonville for the better part of 4 decades. He is a Jacksonville television legend. He's been on TV there for 3-4 decades. He was behind John Buren here for 5 minutes, but he is a Woodlawn guy, and he is the Pro Football Hall of Fame voter in Jacksonville, and is a historian of all things Jaguars, but really is from Woodlawn, Maryland. He is a West Side guy. It is always good to have our quarterback around here. Sam Kouvaris joins us from Jacksonville. They got a new head coach and drama. And I'll tell you what, every time you guys in Jacksonville come on, you say nice things about Shad Khan and the Jaguars and all of that. But I tell you what, there's a little stigma going on there about coaching and hiring and all of that, and you're trying to put some people in the Hall of Fame. It's a little bit of a rocky boat in Jacksonville right now, football-wise, Sammy.
Big time. By the way, I had lunch with John last summer. We met up just outside of Columbia. We had a great time.
John Buren.
I told him never coming to Baltimore, not doing this again. So we spent a couple hours together just sitting there laughing and talking about old times, which is what old guys do. But you're right about Jacksonville. And here's a couple of stats for you. The Jaguars are the losingest professional sports franchise in the last 10 years. Not just football. I'm talking about all of professional sports. That's one thing. The other thing is when the Jaguars take their first snap in September, they will have been in Jacksonville longer than the Colts were in Baltimore. So for all the
these
talk,
Colts, you mean these Colts, the Baltimore Colts?
these Colts, that's
Yeah,
right. Those exact Colts. That's for all the talk about, oh, the team's leaving, it's doing this is happening. Obviously, team's a fixture here and about to build a $1.5 billion stadium at minimum. Cost overruns thanks to Shad Khan. But, since he owned the team, since he bought the team in 2012, they've had, kind of one big winning season where they almost got to the Super Bowl. They lost in the AFC Championship game up in New England to Tom Brady and Julian Edelman and Bill Belichick and that company. But outside of that, I mean, they've been not fair. They've been poor. They've been not a good football team. I thought Doug Peterson was going to be the answer, and I still think he probably was the answer. And I wrote on samsportsline.com a couple of weeks ago, of the 3 things I thought Shad should have done, he chose door number 3, and that was fire Doug. Yeah, I think he should have fired Balky first, asked Doug whether he wanted to stay and get rid of his coordinators, and if not, completely clean house. But, finally they, as I always say, when you're off course, make a course correction. Get it right. And Liam Cohen probably was the second or third kind of most popular pick in the league, Ben Johnson being number 1. Vrabel probably being number 2, but, you knew he was going to New England. So they kind of got the guy they wanted. There was a lot of drama with Tampa Bay and all that, and Cohen going back there. And as much as they tried to deny it yesterday at the press conference, there's no way Cohen's coming here if Balky's still the GM. So I've advocated for Tony Baselli to be a part of this franchise for a long time. I think Shad's getting closer to that. Probably make him an EVP and give him some culture setting responsibilities in the building. But Shad keeps his own counsel, Nestor. He doesn't talk to a lot of people. That's why he hired that buffoon Urban Meyer, and then turned around and finally fixed that shortly thereafter.
Well, that was kind of an embarrassment, right? And I mean, for organizations to have embarrassments and they start to stack up a little bit, it then becomes more difficult to get the candidate you want. And that would be in any walk of life, right? And when you're not getting the best candidates there, Monken was, linked to that. I don't know that Belichick would sign up for it or that it would be available in that way. But I mean, Pete Carroll got a job last week, right? And the Tom Brady thing and the broadcasting thing and the Raiders thing. I mean, there's just a lot of shifting when things are bad, amongst other things with F's and T's in it to begin with that. But but Cleveland, it's a revolving door, and it's either quarterback, leadership, coaching, but in Tampa, it feels like it's been a little bit of all of the above, and maybe you've wrecked Trevor Lawrence. Maybe you've had the quarterback all along.
The quarterback is still the right guy. And that's one thing Cohen said correctly yesterday, that they're going to build the offense around Trevor, which is what they needed to do. And this will be his fourth play caller in the 5 years he's been in the league. And that's difficult for a guy, I think, to constantly be changing what the terminology is, kind of what the concepts are. Why weren't the Jaguars in the Derrick Henry sweepstakes? Well, they thought that, Tank Bigsby and Travis Etienne were better. I mean, that stuff just doesn't make any sense. This ever since they fired Tom Coughlin in 2001, and that's ages ago, and they needed to at the time because nobody was going to buy a ticket to a Tom Coughlin coach team. They have yet to ever rebuild any kind of culture. If you remember back then, the Jaguars were in the AFC Central, and Coughlin was building the team to compete with the Steelers because the Steelers were the gold standard. And when you watch Jaguar Steeler games, they look like Baltimore Pittsburgh games are now. Tough, hard. I mean, why have the Steelers had three coaches in the last 70 years, right? Since 1970. Chuck Noll, Bill Cowher, and Mike Tomlin. Because they have a culture that, James Harrison and Greg Lloyd are the same player. They just change names. They look for the same kind of guy. If you're going to play the Steelers, I don't care what team you are, what do you expect? Hard, tough, physical. The Jaguars they've always been chasing after like the next shiny thing all the time. Oh, let's trade Calais Campbell while he's the reigning Walter Payton Man of the Year for a fifth-round pick to the Ravens. Well, you saw what Mike McDaniel said this year about 12 weeks into the season. The Ravens wanted him back, and McDaniel went to the GM and Calais and said, you're much too valuable here, not just on the field, but in the locker room. We're not changing. We're not letting you go. And that's the kind of thing the Jaguars have never done. They've always gotten rid of players a year too early. They've always never considered the impact it may have in the locker room. They haven't built a culture that I think breeds any kind of winning, any kind of accountability, which is why I've advocated for Baselli, because he is that kind of guy. He was the sheriff on those teams. It wasn't Brunell. Brunell's not that personality. Trevor's not that personality. It was Fred Taylor and it was Tony Baselli who kind of set the tone there.
Sam Kouvaris is here. He is a Baltimorean via Jacksonville. He won the sweepstakes on the weather, at least maybe not last week when it was snowing in Jacksonville, but most of the time you've managed to avoid the snow as well as the sand traps down there in Ponte Vedra as well. You're a Hall of Fame voter, and you've been one for a long, long time. You're the Jacksonville person. You can speak to the history of all of that. And with Yanda, with Steve Smith, with Terrell Suggs up, I've tried to go out, and I looked, when I got the list of 49, I realized I know half of you really well, and I figured by the end of the month, I'll have half of you on. I think you're maybe the 11th or 12th voter I've had on since Christmas-ish, when we were chasing down Vic Carucci in Buffalo because we're playing him and whatnot.
Right.
Your thoughts on the three Raven-oriented players, and Steve Smith's obviously Carolina. Ira's already blown me up on that one. But in regard to Suggs and in regard to Yanda, I think so much of the Hall of Fame, first off, people think of it as this big thing. It's 49 people. People think it's still in a room. It's not. It's on Zoom. I think they see it play out in this honors program and the television part of what it's become in the modern era. But the log jam, and I don't want to call it politics. I think it's more like, pick one wide receiver, Hines Ward, Torrey Holt, Reggie Wayne, or Steve Smith. Well, Hines Ward can't even get onto the ballot. Steve Smith's on it now. And I think if I have to pick through the four of them, and I'm thinking if I had to defend against them as a coordinator, if I'm a cornerback, if I have to play them on any given Sunday in their prime, not is he playing with Peyton Manning? Is he playing with Kurt Warner? Who is just trying to take it the way you guys try to take this body of work for all of these people and separate that, that's one position. Then Suggs has to deal with Jared Allen and every other rush. Marshal Yanda has to deal with whatever the history is of offensive linemen. We talk about Justin Tucker like he's the GOAT. He's just going to get in. And I'm like, all right, bring a kicker into that room in 2031 and tell me who he's up against, Lamar Jackson or a kicker. Because it usually winds up being like that, right?
No, without question. And Vinatieri is in the room this year. I don't know how do you keep Vinatieri out, but
I don't know
he's
how
a
you get
kicker.
him in.
How do you
Right?
get him in there?
Right. Yeah.
So, you're right. It's a harder job than I think it looks like from the outside. So when people really criticize us, me personally, a lot of times, I get a lot of BS from people. And I just realized early on, they don't understand the process at all. And it's a very difficult process. For the fact that these guys made it to the final 15, that's one big thing. You got to remember though, when it comes to wide receiver and you look at those wide receivers, you could say, and you use the word, they talk about there's a logjam at wide receiver. Well, when it was Chris Carter and Tim Brown and those guys, I thought all those guys were Hall of Famers. I mean, is it really a logjam at wide receiver? Do a lot of people just don't think that those guys are Hall of Famers? Maybe they're not. I mean, if you can certainly
Reggie
make it.
Wayne to me, like I think like he played in a miracle system. You know what I mean? Like for me,
Well,
Torrey
without
Holt played on a
question.
miracle team, and I know everybody's pissed that there are too many. I had balls wrong last week. Too many Rams in, from that team, and I'm thinking, I love Torrey Holt. So I mean, I can make that case, but I don't know when there's 49 of you with all varying opinions about Art Modell. And we went through that with Tony Grossi and years ago. And we'll always go through the Art Modell thing, you and me. But when it comes to players and when it comes to a guard who has no stats, comparing that to a kicker who didn't ever make a tackle, right?
Right. Let me tell you, first of all, the Baltimore guys that you mentioned, the most impressive resume is Marshal Yanda's resume. I mean, it's just, I mean, how can you not vote for him until you start stacking it up against the other guys? And remember, there's 15 of those, and you can only vote for five. That's it. It's all you're allowed to vote for. So, and
You
they
got to get
changed the rules.
80%, 80%.
And they've changed the rules this year. We got new bylaws that they sent us recently about how we're going to vote for it. It used to be you got down to the last five, and then you had to get an up or down vote, and you had to get 80%. Now they're going to take it down to seven, and the guys with 80% get in. So it's going to be interesting to see how that works. It's a lot about what they're doing these days with the hall that I don't like, and I've had that discussion a couple of times with the president of the hall. Um, Believe it or not, I may be the most tenured person on the committee. This was my 31st year on the committee. So,
Wow.
um,
Jacksonville never had anybody else, right?
no. And I think this was John McClain's 30th year. And I remember I was on a year before John, who
How
was
many were
fabulous,
on it in 96 when you found it then?
32.
So now it's up to
Actually, I
49 or
was I
at
was on in
larges,
90.
right?
I was on in 95. They appointed me in 94. My first meeting was 90, 95 in Glendale. And when I walked in there as a young guy, it's an impressive group when you first walk in there, and particularly when it's in person, and they're hoping to get back. And I think they
Who
may.
was in that room? Will
Well, that's
McDonough.
what I was about to tell you. I think they
Yeah.
may get back. They may get back to doing it in person
Stedman was
once
in that
once
room.
they build the hotel. Of course, growing up in Baltimore, I walk in and John Stedman's there. Okay, and I mean he's an icon to me, and he was always so friendly to me at the other places that I saw him at Augusta National, at a Colts game. He was always very nice to
You
me.
were
He knew I
special because you were from Baltimore.
from Baltimore. Yeah.
That was always.
But um, Edwin Pope from the Miami Herald there is, and Tom McEwen from the Tampa Tribune is there, and Will McDonough from the Boston Herald is there, and Jack Buck is standing there, and Furman Bisher from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution is there. And I mean, these are when you're in our business, a lot of people idolize, and of course I did, John and Brooks and all
I'm the
those guys.
same way.
But
And I tell Tom Davis that he don't believe it, and Vince was that like Chris
yeah,
Thomas. We
Vince
talked to
Bagley.
like
I mean, the first time I met Vince Bagley, I was kind of speechless. I mean, so and there's a guy who, had handwritten notes in front of him and stuff. But it's just an interesting process. There are some forces of personality in that room. The problem is, part of the problem I think is that they've expanded the committee now to 49. It has been 50. But when it was 32 and we met in person, it was a continental breakfast and beforehand the meeting started at 7 and the announcement was at noon. Now there's 49 people on the committee. We've got to go over three seniors, a contributor, and a coach, and 15 modern era players, all in the same day, all now on Zoom. And they serve, or when we meet in person, they serve two full meals, and then there's a TV show. All right. This isn't about the TV show. And that the previous administration of the hall seemed to be much more focused on the television show than they were on, hey, this is an important thing. We're literally changing a guy's life. When you put HOF behind your name, you're a speaker, all of a sudden your number goes up dramatically. All those kinds of things that happen. So I think eventually we'll probably all meet in Canton, and I wouldn't mind seeing them change it to Hall of Fame weekend up there, in August, and totally separated from the Super Bowl and everything else. Bring it, get away from all this other stuff. Be your own thing, and I think the thing has enough weight that it can carry itself. But we'll see what happens. I do think the
It'd be
guys
an
you mentioned.
interesting summer conversation in August
Yeah,
when nothing else is going on.
exactly,
It would
exactly,
kick off the season to say these guys are getting in next summer. Um,
exactly.
I love that, and I would be the highest honor of my life, and I think I'm as qualified as anyone to do it after covering the sport for 27 years and getting thrown out. But when I was young, I thought I wanted to be on the committee. As I've gotten older and I feel like I'm qualified now, I look at it and say, oh my God, for all of you, a lot of work, a lot of screen, things that I'm used to as a public figure here and people pissed off or whatever. I'm not worried about that. I just feel like it's really a lot of work that you guys put in that's not as appreciated as it should be. And that's why I wanted to bring you on this month. Because people, when Marshall makes it or doesn't make it, or Steve, however it goes, my guy
Right?
doesn't make it, they're mad at something or somebody. And I'm like, I know half the
They'll be
people
mad
in
at
the room.
Scott. They'll be mad at Scott, right? And it's Scott.
I don't know about that. I don't know that there's that much juice that people really want to see Suggs do anything well. I think Marshall has much more emotion involved, but not so much that if he doesn't get in or next year or whatever. And to your point, every one of you I've talked to tells me Yanda is of the
Yeah.
three names here in Baltimore, he's the most accomplished and he'll get in first. You're like
But
the
think
fifth or
think
sixth person
about
this week to tell me that.
think about the responsibility that Scott Garceau had, to for this year to make three presentations to that group out of the 15 that were made. I'm presenting Fred Taylor, who, by the way, from a statistic standpoint, it's a no-brainer. But nobody saw Fred play, and the Jaguars didn't win any Super Bowls, and he toiled in Jacksonville. But when you start comparing his stats, you're like, how's this guy not in already? And Tom Coughlin even said to me, if he played for me in New York, Fred Taylor would already be in the Hall of Fame, and that's probably true.
Winning's
But
important, and it'll be important for Lamar and for all the rest of these guys too,
sure,
right?
and I look at how much work that I put into Baselli for the 6 years that he was a finalist and finally got in, and how much work I put in for Fred. I can't imagine how much work Scott's putting in for all three of those guys of the 15 presentations that he's going to have to make. So you're
I'm
right.
glad I don't have to make the Suggs presentation. At least, hey, at this point, that wouldn't be a good one for me to make. Sam Kouvaris is here. He has been my friend for a long, long time. He's been on television in Jacksonville for a lifetime. He's now on the golf course from time to time, and you can catch up with him. Sam still does some sports, and you can find him down in Jacksonville. He's easy to Google and find out on social media as well in the voting process. Do you have anything you say on these candidates as far as the Baltimore candidates for your thoughts about them as candidates?
You can call me
Suggs,
you can call me somebody who would be in the category of anti-recency bias. All
fair
right,
enough.
because there are people on the committee who, young people in particular, and I hate to sound like get off my lawn, but hey, look, we put in a lot of first ballot guys. First ballot guys to me are, ladies and gentlemen, John Unitas, and sit down. Okay, that's a first ballot guy. Outside of that, when you got to kind of explain this and that and this and that, there are other people that I've heard their presentations. I've heard what they have said about them for 5 years. Jared Allen, I think, is a very good example. Antonio Gates last year did not get in. A lot of people thought he was a first ballot guy, and I mean, he scored what 108 touchdowns or something, ridiculous like that. So when you start to look at the 15 and you start to formulate in your mind, all right, and I can tell you this, Nestor, when I cut from 15 to 10, which is the first cut, I can usually do that because it's guys who, might be the first time as a finalist, and I know they're going to get back in. When I cut from 10 to 5, I'm cutting 5 Hall of Famers. These are guys that are going to get in, but I got to decide is this guy or that guy. And, you know, to me, it's like this year, Hay, the contributor, how Ralph Hay is not in the Hall of Fame. He still helped found the National Football League is beyond me, you know. But I'm sure for years and years, people kept saying, "Oh, well, he'll get in next year. He'll get in next year." Well, that now all of a sudden it's 80 years later. It's time for a guy like Ralph Hay to get in the Hall of Fame, obviously. And to me, that's how I look at the Hall. Let's get the people in. It doesn't have to be guys who played yesterday. It doesn't have to be guys who had highlights on, YouTube. It can be guys who are, it's kind of like when my friend Peter King said Chris Carter is the greatest boundary receiver in the history of the NFL. And I looked at him and said, "Really, Peter? I know you know Raymond Berry." and that created a little bit of spark in there.
Well,
So
I'm sure there's a lot of spark in there with a lot of people that feel strongly like you do about. You felt strongly about Tony Baselli for a number of years. People just said he got hurt, he got hurt, he got hurt. And, I think for the Kirby Pucketts or the people that had shortened careers in various ways, to say Terrell Davis being another one of them, to say how great was he, I don't know. Then there's the longevity of the Yandas and Suggs, who still, when they get there, there's somebody in line in front of them, and as it probably should be. It's hard to get in the Hall of Fame, as you pointed out, right?
Terrell Davis had basically a 3-year career, you know, but he is statistically the greatest postseason running back in history. So, I mean, there are a lot of shifting things that happened during those meetings. And, it's kind of how Terrell Owens got in there. There's just a lot of different things that happen that some of it's momentum, which sounds weird, but absolutely some of it's momentum. But, I think this year's class will be interesting to hear the presentations, to hear what everybody kind of thinks about people on the positive. And one of the good things is, and the bad thing is that there's too many people on the committee. The good thing is that there are enough guys and women on the committee who are willing to dissent. Dr. Z, Paul Zimmerman, used to call the majority of the committee silent assassins because they would never say anything and then they'd vote no. You know, it's like, hey, if you got a no vote, I want to hear from you. And John Clayton asked me that in a meeting once about Lawrence Taylor. And I said, I think he's the greatest defensive player in the history of the league. But I said, part of our bylaws here says contributions to the game. And I think his contributions to the game right now are negative. Well, that was a bad meeting because it was a lot of, and somebody recorded the meeting. And I know that because the next day I was quoted in the New York Post perfectly. All right. It's exactly what I said. And somebody's recorded it if they quote you perfectly. But, Lawrence Taylor got in and that's that. The committee spoke and that was the end of my discussion. But
Well,
by
if
the
I
way,
got in
after
the
that,
room
they
with
changed.
Suggs, I would say, fellas, I've been in a lot of locker rooms, ladies as well, Shireen and the other ladies in the room. In a lot of locker rooms, have any of you ever stood in the locker and had a player put their pinky in their mouth and stick it in your ear while you have a notebook in the next locker? Have you ever had anybody? Have you ever have a player literally while a player is being interviewed stand behind him on a stool and drop his pants with his ass on his teammate's head while your cameras are rolling? I was in the
Something
room when that
similar,
happened.
but not that specific.
So
Yeah.
that would be my, like Terrell Suggs was a disrespectful human in regard, and that not even the bleach or the things that we can't consider. But to me, it's a Hall of Fame, not a Hall of Shame, to some degree. And we could talk Ty Cobb and Pete Rose and steroids and baseball and all that. But I do think you want men of character, and I say men because men play football, men of character in the Hall of Fame for me.
So there was that was described in our bios extends to the locker room. Consequently, Terrell Owens, Charles Haley, I think are two good examples of, I mean, what kind of teammates were those guys? Haley, apparently was diagnosed as being bipolar. Terrell Owens was, you know, basically thrown off of five teams. Both of them are in the Hall of Fame, though, because of the kind of players that they were. Even though, and my argument was, if we're going to sit around and pontificate that this is the ultimate team game, what kind of teammate you are should count, right? But the committee
Getting
spoke in
thrown
there,
off of
so
five
that's that.
teams, right? Like I mean, Earl Thomas, when he comes up, you're talk about what happened on the field. We dealt with it here, and Eric DeCosta made a $55 million mistake here. So Sam Kouvaris is here. I'm having a little transmission problem. I'll get you back on. We'll get better Wi-Fi. I love you down in Jacksonville. I hope it heals soon down there for all of you. We got Lamar going on up here, and you're watching from afar. But quite frankly, they haven't peed a drop here. And we had the whole backlash last week where Andrews drops the ball. What would John Stedman make of this, Sam? Andrews drops the ball and then doesn't show up for the podium with the season on the line. Like our generation that just never, ever. I had Joe Flacco on today who threw a pick to Palomalo in an AFC Championship game. He threw the pass to Lee Evans that got batted away. And I said to him, why did you go to the podium every time you went to the podium? And he took this long, pregnant pause and he went, well, to be honest, I didn't think I had a choice.
And that's the way it should be. I mean, guys are, and I rarely talk about money, but you're paid a lot to do that job, and when you fail at that job, part of your responsibility is to explain why, right? I mean, there's one thing about dealing with the fans, people who had money on the game or whatever, but there's a whole other thing with just being a professional, and that's part of being a professional.
Sam, I love you, man. I appreciate you. I'm going to get down and see Miss Wassel, my kindergarten teacher in Yulee. I might even honor the Derrick Henry. I got to, before I get going here, because I've been showing you all of this stuff, I picked this up, and this honors Yulee, Florida, as well as Alabama. But I picked up the Houston Oiler throwback for Derrick Henry. And, since Chad Steele threw me out, I haven't really been wearing Raven stuff because, they don't want me around. But I love the Henry jersey. So I wore this, one of Jacksonville's finest, right? Like if the franchise was awesome, he would have wanted to play there, right?
I don't know. I know why he didn't go to Florida. I mean, he's got some family issues here in North Florida, but the Jaguars not pursuing him it just showed you kind of what they thought. That and the Calais thing just boggle my mind.
We'll always have this, Sammy. Don't forget. We'll always have
That's
our
right.
history.
That's
Sam
right.
Kouvaris joins us here from Jacksonville. He will be voting in the Pro Football Hall of Fame, or has already voted. The announcement's coming out next week. We're doing a cup of Super Bowl for the Maryland Food Bank and local subsidiaries, local pantries in the communities. We'll be at Costas on Monday. Tuesday, we're going to be at Fadley's at Lexington Market, which is coming to Catonsville soon. Wednesday, we're going to be at Coco's in Lauraville. Thursday, we are going to be in State Fair in Catonsville on Sam's side of town. And then Friday, we'll wrap it up in Timonium and Mays Chapel at Cooper's North. Bring out canned goods, bring out dry goods. It's the coldest week of the year, coldest time of the year. Pantries are drying up. Do some good deeds next week and come out and support us. We're going to be telling stories all week of community organizations, charitable organizations, and quite frankly, Baltimore positive stories. I'm Nestor. We're WNST, AM 1570, Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore positive.